A small Dutch minesweeper was the only survivor of a vicious confrontation with the Japanese in late 1941 and was immediately ordered to retreat to Australia. Staying near coastlines and only cruising at nighttime, the small vessel sailed at a top speed of 15 miles per hour and remained hidden by an unorthodox approach. She was painted as a camouflage measure and coated in fresh foliage made up of local plants and branches to blend in with the over 18,000 islands in the area. Led by a tenacious commander and with only half of her crew, HNLMS Abraham Crijnssen ventured into dangerous territory as a floating and steaming island, hoping to go unnoticed by the implacable enemy. An Allied defeat. In February of 1942, the combined Dutch, American, Australian, and British fleet stationed in the Dutch East Indies colony, known today as Indonesia, was attacked by the Imperial Japanese Navy. The losses were massive, including famous Dutch naval officer Rear Admiral Karl Doorman and 2,300 men, as well as all capital Dutch Royal Navy ships, starting with the Dutch flagship, the HNLMS De Ruyter light cruiser. The swift and brutal defeat led to the Japanese occupation of the entire Netherlands East Indies territory. And by the time the Battle of the Java Sea ended, only 4 Dutch ships were still standing. The surviving vessels included a squad of 184-foot-long Jan van Amstel-class steel minesweepers that formed the 2nd Minesweeper Division, led by Lieutenant Commander J.R.L. Lebeau. On March 6, 1942, without the possibility of taking down the Japanese fleet by themselves, these smaller and lightly armed ships received the code KPX and were given vague orders from the Dutch naval commander to attempt to withdraw to Australia or Colombo in Sri Lanka. The minesweeper's only chance of survival was to flee the Japanese as fast as possible. However, the Jan van Amstel-class ships were not built to escape. With a top speed of only 17 miles per hour and with a single 3-inch gun and 2 Oerlikon 20mm cannons, these minesweepers were an exceedingly easy target. As the skies and the seas filled with more and more Japanese craft, escaping became more difficult with every hour that passed. Commander Lebeau then contradicted the KPX order and told the ship's commanding officers to each decide their own escape technique. One of the ship's commanding officers, Lieutenant Commander J.P.A. Decker, decided to sink his own vessel with a set of bombs and not endanger his crew any further. It looked as though the only option was to somehow sneak past the Japanese without being spotted, and the other 3 decided to give it a try. With this in mind, someone in the crew of the HNLMS Abraham Crijnssen minesweeper had the crazy idea of disguising the ship as an island, and his officers went with it. Master of Disguise. The idea behind the plan came from the fact that the Java Sea around modern Malaysia and Indonesia is peppered with over 18,000 islands of all sizes. Lieutenant Commander A. van Meert believed this was their only shot and was aware of the risks. He then allowed his crew to decide whether to participate in the dangerous escape attempt or disembark. Half the crew then abandoned the ship on a nearby island, and Commander van Meert gave the go-ahead to begin the ruse with a smaller company. Although Crijnssen wasn't a large ship by average standards, it also wasn't easy to hide. To achieve the island disguise, the 45 members of the crew picked up vegetation from nearby islands, cutting down as many trees and leaves as they could. Because their main threat was Japanese aircraft, the crew covered the ship with nets, branches, and foliage, trying to resemble an ordinary tropical island. In addition, any exposed metal was repainted in different shades of gray to imitate rock formations. The ship would anchor close to the shore during daylight, remaining entirely stationary and silent as long as the sun was out. It was during the nights that the ship blended better with all the islands in the area, and the crew worked hastily to make it work. Sailing off. The 2 uncamouflaged minesweepers, HNLMS Jan van Amstel and HNLMS Elan Dubois, left shore together. However, neither had enough fuel to make it to Australia. In addition, Elan Dubois had a boiler malfunction soon after leaving the port. The following day, both sister ships reached the roadstead of Gili Raja and anchored in the area to wait for sundown. Meanwhile, HNLMS Abraham Crijnssen left the harbor well camouflaged and with maximum fuel capacity. Although wary that something could go wrong at any moment, Lieutenant Commander Van Meert was determined to get his crew back to safety. That's why he decided to separate from the other highly visible ships and proceed independently. The decision proved wise, as the other two ships were soon spotted by a Japanese plane on March 7th. Back on board and lacking sailors, the Dutch decided to sink Ilan Dubois because of her boiler problem, and the remaining crew members hopped over to her sister ship. HNLMS Jan van Amstel was then somewhat camouflaged and took off to the east on March 8th. However, it proved too late, as Japanese destroyer Arashio sank her and took the lives of 23 men, including the commanding officer of Ilan Dubois. The only standing survivor of the Battle of the Java Sea was now HNLMS Abraham Crijnssen. Daring escape. The ship left Gili Genteng during the night on March 7th, with an average speed of only 13.8 miles per hour. Stemming past islands and in between coral reefs, she headed towards the Kangean Islands, arriving there early the following day. Once again, the crew refreshed the vegetation, paying extra attention to the local plants. Then, as the sun went down, she continued her dangerous journey, heading into open waters. Due to the lack of coastlines to cover their tracks, the risk of being spotted by the Japanese was at its most prominent, but Abraham Crijnssen anchored safely in the Bay of Potopadu by the morning. Crew members that boarded a motor dinghy to collect water, vegetation, and information learned that no Japanese troops had arrived on the island yet, and that no aircraft had been spotted in 4 days. The reassuring news proved to Van Meert that the Japanese were probably looking for the escaped minesweepers at the wrong place, or not looking at all. The crew would not find out about their two sister ships' grim fate until much later. At last. The camouflage paint on the minesweeper was continually retouched by the crew, and after stocking up on supplies, the ship left again after sundown, heading towards the Strait of Alas at a speed of 15 miles per hour. However, she was slowed down, as Officer Van Meert decided to save fuel. During the day, the minesweeper took cover under the coastline, and on the evening of March 10th, she headed to the dangerous passage of the strait. By the following day, Abraham Crijnssen had successfully crossed the strait and entered the vast openness of the Indian Ocean, keeping her southern course towards Australia. Once there, the crew threw the camouflage foliage overboard, as it did not serve any purpose anymore and would only slow down the vessel. As March 13th arrived, the sailors spotted Australia's northwest cape and burst into applause. Because Commanding Officer Van Meert wanted to sail as fast as possible with their available fuel, the minesweeper pushed on and did not stop at nearby islands. 2 days later, the HNLMS Abraham Crijnssen minesweeper arrived safely in Geraldton, Western Australia. Then, after resupplying fuel, the ship took off to the harbour city of Fremantle, arriving on March 20th. The exhausted crew was relieved and proud to have achieved the impossible. Safe and sound. With courage and unwavering persistence, Lieutenant Commander A. Van Meert and his 45-man crew arrived safely in Australia, bringing the eventful and once-in-a-lifetime journey to an end. The commanding officer of the deliberately sunk Dutch ship who remained on land suffered in a Japanese POW camp for 2 years and later received a reprimand from his army superiors. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Commander Van Meert and 9 of his crew members received the Cross of Merit for the fearlessness displayed during the daring escape. Following the end of World War II, the Abraham Crijnssen minesweeper operated less dangerous missions and was commissioned into the Royal Australian Navy to serve as an anti-submarine convoy escort. She was then recommissioned to the Royal Netherlands Navy, patrolled the Netherlands East Indies, and was decommissioned in 1960, only to become a museum owned by the Dutch Navy. Abraham Crijnssen, the last surviving Dutch warship from World War II, remains the only ship to have evaded the enemy by being disguised as an island during the war, and she managed to do the unthinkable with outstanding leadership and half a crew. Thank you for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and click on the bell icon to be notified of all our newest productions. And don't forget to let us know your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to all our Dark Documentaries channels for more exciting content. Stay tuned.